Okay.
Go ahead and get things moving. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
All right, so we are reaching to the very end of the book of Bereshit. We have reached the parasha of Vayechi, which is, of course, one of those wonderfully ironically named parshiot because Vayechi contains the death of two people. We have Vayechi, which means, and he lived, which describes the end of Jacob, and also describes the end of Joseph. And we forget about him a little bit because most of the parasha is taken up with Jacob and his final words and his final deeds, but we do end up with Joseph as well. So Jacob's life assessment. What do we think? Success? Failure? If we were going to rate his life, what would we put on the plus side? What would we put on the negative side? Okay, so we're positive on the whole.
12 children, 12 tribes, children.
12 sons. Like, yeah, let's make sure that we recognize that there was at least one daughter, and Midrash says many more. So 12 sons that actually all stayed together by the end. Had a long period in the middle where that wasn't so true, which is the first time that has happened since Abraham, right? Right? Abraham had two sons, only one of them stayed with the covenant. Isaac had two sons, only one of them stayed with the covenant. Jacob has 12 sons, and all of them stay with the covenant. And in fact, in this parasha, we get two bonus ones vis-a-vis Joseph's children, so his grandchildren become like his children as well. So that's a rather amazing feat. It's unprecedented in the line of the patriarchs. What else in his credit? How about he's prosperous? Right? He finishes off his years in luxury and in comfort. He and his family prosper and do very well. First, originally when he started off, but now, again, they're prospering greatly in the land of Egypt. That's nice to be able to see your children and grandchildren doing well, isn't it? Yes?
He's also willing to relocate when he sees there's better opportunities someplace else.
Spoken like a snowbird who's come down. He relocates when necessary, and it was also because of the weather in that particular case. That's what the famine comes from, is from bad weather.
But even with Laban, when he realized he had outlived his usefulness there, he could do better on his own rather than being under him. Started his own company.
Absolutely, yes. So he has had a flexibility through life that has carried him from good thing to better thing for the most part. He has had some problems, however. Yes, he had trouble with his brother, which was mostly reconciled-ish. We have, and we will, I'm sure, other years talk about that more. He, of course, had a tragedy befall his daughter, Dinah. Terrible incident there. He lost his beloved Rachel much earlier than he would have liked, I'm sure, when she died giving birth to Benjamin. He spent 20 years thinking that Joseph was dead. So it's not been a life untinged by tragedy. And so now we're going to see his final words, his final feelings, and see if there's anything interesting about his death that is perhaps equally unprecedented with the other patriarchs. So we're in Vayechi, which is page 293, and then we're going to jump a little bit later on. This is chapter 47, verse 28, for those who might be using a different Chumash, different copy of the Torah. Volunteers? Making up for lost time. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years.
All right, so when Jacob first arrived, or first heard that Joseph was still alive, he said, "It's enough that I've seen him, now I can die in peace." And he gets 17 more years. So it's nice that he actually had more than simply a reunion with his son, but actually got to spend 17 years with his long-lost son.
And when the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "Do me this favor. Place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He replied, "I will do as you have spoken." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
All right, so you added a little extra inflection with the word and swear to me, which is good, because it reinforces a little bit of some of what the commentators have argued about, which is, first of all, why is Jacob asking Joseph to swear? Why not all of the brothers?
Because he accepts Joseph as the leader of the crowd.
Joseph's the leader of the crowd, absolutely. And
He has had the most experience with things, too, worldly things,
He's-
considerably.
he's traveled, as they say.
Joseph has a position in Egypt where he has authority to do these things, where the other brothers, they're not anything.
And Joseph, being the second in command of Egypt, certainly has the wherewithal to get it done, to make sure that it happens. And by the redundancy here of both do it and Joseph saying I will, and then saying swear to it and he swears, some commentators have also picked up on this by saying that Jacob was concerned that Joseph might be harboring a grudge. Remember we said some of the tragedy that came into Jacob's life was the death of Rachel, the death of Rachel, who was Joseph's mother, and Rachel was not buried in Machpelah. She was not buried in the tomb. She was buried on the road. So there are many commentators who say that Jacob was concerned that his son Joseph, who was the daughter of Rachel, son of Rachel, thank you, genders are important, that he might still be harboring a grudge that his mother wasn't buried in the tomb with the other patriarchs. And so therefore he might not give his father full honor and the full dignity of being schlepped all the way back to the land of Israel, to Hebron, to be buried in Machpelah. And so getting this double promise may have been his way of reinforcing that.
Why do they switch from the use of Jacob to Israel in the middle of a
In the middle of a discussion, right?
Yeah.
Well, it is the double name. I mean, it is Jacob's dual name. The idea here might simply be that what we're talking about is that Israel, meaning Jacob, is bowing, showing his acceptance and his trust in his son, and is acting here less as an individual and more as a representative of the nation that will be. And hold on to that thought, because it is going to come back. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say for the moment, but hold on to it. But it's good that you notice that, because the double naming of Jacob will play a part in our later discussions. All right, so this is the promise. Jacob then goes through a lengthy meeting of the grandchildren. He goes through lengthy blessings of all of his other children, although whether or not we want to count all the blessings as blessings, and some of them are much more like prophecy than actual blessing, is a whole nother discussion. But flip ahead to chapter 49, right near the end of it, after he's done with all the blessings, and go to verse 29, which is at the bottom of page 305. So it's chapter 49, verse 29.
Then he instructed them, saying to them, I am about to be gathered to my kin. Bury me with my fathers in the cave which is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave which is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried, there Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished his instructions to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed, and breathing his last, he was gathered to his people.
Okay.
He wants to make sure they know which field, which cave it is.
Very precise, but if you remember all the way back with Sarah, the other parasha that's named for life that also contains two deaths, Abraham and Sarah's in that case, the parasha was very clear and very, very explicit about all the negotiations and all the demarcations of where Abraham was buying this cave of Machpelah. So it should not come as a surprise that his grandson is equally punctilious about making sure the kids know where he wants to be buried. Right? Good. And good reminder as an aside, always make sure your family knows what you want done. That should be a lesson for all of us, regardless of our age or how close or hopefully how far we are from needing them to do any of these things for us. leave explicit instructions, and preferably discuss them with the family, and if there are multiple siblings, with all of the family before things happen. This is a very important way to prevent any difficulties from arriving of different children thinking they know what mom or dad wanted done, and then arguing about how that will be taken care of. So, nothing like a few words to make sure that there won't be years of rancor among the family. Okay, so he was gathered to his people. Okay, let's go ahead and on page 50 and see what happens. Chapter 50.
Joseph flung himself upon his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph ordered the physicians in his service to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. It required 40 days, for such is the full period of embalming. The Egyptians bewailed him 70 days, and when the wailing period was over, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's court, saying, "Do me this favor, and lay this appeal before Pharaoh. My father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. Be sure to bury me in the grave, which I made ready for myself in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, let me go up and bury my father, then I shall return." And Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father, as he made you promise an oath."
All right. Now you're probably also thinking, well, wait a minute. I thought in Judaism we didn't go in for that whole embalming thing.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Well, what's that?
You're
Well,
going to schlep him for a long time anyway.
we're in Egypt,
Yeah.
home of embalming in the ancient world, right? All those mummies and such. So embalming is perfectly normal for them. And when you are going to transport the body such a distance, and the body would become repulsive in the process, embalming can be permitted under such circumstances. We don't make a habit of it in Judaism because nowadays we're almost always able to transport a body anywhere in the world within a time period that it's not as necessary. But in the ancient world, that could sometimes happen. If someone passed away a month's journey away from the land of Israel and they were going to be buried there, something had to be done to make sure that the body could arrive in something other than a repulsive fashion. So embalming is not used for convenience sake. It is not used for a way to delay burial just because it would be nicer to have it on a Sunday. We don't use embalming to protect the body as though something's wrong with the body decomposing once it's been buried, but in special circumstances it can be allowed. Okay, any other questions on this section here? So it seems like Joseph is going to make good on his promise. Why does he need permission?
Because he's leaving the land of Egypt, and if you're an official, you don't take off without permission.
Absolutely. So we can see that through Joseph's service to Pharaoh, we are already bound to Egypt. That we already have lost some of the freedom that is going to only become worse during the next Pharaoh's reign and when our enslavement begins. So he's already unable to simply leave the land when he feels like it, even for a good reason, without getting the express permission of Pharaoh. All right, keep going.
So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the officials of Pharaoh, the senior members of his court, and all of Egypt's dignitaries, together with all of Joseph's household, his brothers and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the region of Goshen.
Sound familiar? For those of you that have read the story of Exodus, where one of the negotiated statements for Pharaoh is, you can go out and worship, but leave behind your children or leave behind your flocks. We see it here. It's a standard technique for ensuring there's collateral. I was going to say hostages, but collateral is a nicer word to make sure that people come back.
Chariots too and horsemen went up with him. It was a very large troop. When they came to Goren Ha'akad, which is beyond the Jordan, they held there a very great and solemn lamentation. And he observed a mourning period of 7 days for his father. And when the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning at Goren Ha'akad, they said, "This is a solemn mourning on the part of the Egyptians." That's why it was named Abu Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus, his sons did for him as he had instructed them. His sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field near Mamre, which Abraham had bought for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father.
Okay. It's all very clear, right? All very cut and dry. I mean, there's a lot of little details that might get our attention.
Where did it be on?
For the travel route, that's all.
They came up through around this way.
Apparently, in this case, yes.
And this part was outside Egypt, but they named it for a city for Egypt.
Right. Jacob isn't dead.
What?
Huh?
Huh?
Okay? Jacob isn't dead. Now, I'm not making that up. We're going to be looking at a section from the Talmud that says explicitly Jacob is not dead. I can see a lot of skepticism on faces. Okay? And I was equally skeptical the first time I came across this passage as well. But let's see what is meant by this, and let's see whether there's any precedent for understanding the passing of a person or the non-passing of a person. So, volunteer to read a little Talmud for us? Harry, you want to keep going? Sure.
Reb Nachman and Reb Isaac were sitting together for a meal, and Reb Nachman said to Reb Isaac, "Let the master say something of learning.
Right? When you get together,
Say something smart."
share some Torah. Right? As long as we're together, we can't just sit here and eat and not talk. We got to share something of Torah.
He said to him, "This is what Reb Yochanan said. People do not converse at meals, lest the windpipe come before the gullet and endanger life."
How's that for some Torah? You want that I should teach you during dinner? Well, let me teach you this great piece of wisdom that I have learned. You don't talk during dinner because you might choke.
Especially when you hear what I'm going to say.
Shut up and eat, exactly. So it's this wonderful little bit of wisdom, but it proves Rabbi Yochanan's credentials, who he's quoting for this teaching, as being a man of wisdom and discretion. This is somebody who is practical. This is somebody who is down to earth. So understand that when we read the next quote, that this is not some pie-in-the-sky kind of rabbi who is going to make this important statement.
After they finished eating, he said to him, "This is what Reb Yochanan said. Jacob, our father, never died."
Okay? What? Like Schneerson, slightly different intent, as we'll see.
He said to him, "Was it then for nothing that the eulogizers eulogized him, the embalmers embalmed him, and the gravediggers buried him?"
All right, and to be continued. We're going to see the rest of the argument on the backside. Don't flip. We're going to see the rest of it on the backside. But, come on! Even within the Talmud, this statement does not just go by. And sometimes the agadic statements, these sort of philosophical or mythical statements, can just be said of, oh, well, that's an interesting take. But here, the Talmud itself goes, wait a minute. They embalmed him. They usually do that when someone's dead. They eulogized him. That's usually, they check for pulses before they start that sort of thing. And they buried him. They dug a hole in the cave of Machpelah and they put him inside of it. How can you possibly make a statement that Jacob didn't die? Well, there's a couple different reasons. One of them is, if you look back on page 306, in verse 33, it's verse 33 of chapter 49, we get a very unusual phrase. So in verse 33 it says, in the English, right, he drew his feet into the bed and breathing his last he was gathered to his people. Well, that breathing his last is an unusual word, right? It's vayigva. Vayigva. How many people are familiar with that word? No. Why? Because that's not the normal word that used for someone dying. Right? Usually we use that someone died is met, right? Vayamo. That they passed away, they died. This word is not used for any of the other patriarchs for passing away. Now it gets translated here as drawing his last breath or breathing his last, which sure sounds nice. Sometimes in some translations you'll see giving up the ghost. It is an unusual phrase to describe someone's passing. And as such, Rabbi Yochanan is holding on to it. And as we're going to see, there was another text that comes much later from the book of Jeremiah that he is going to also use to support his contention that he's not dead. But this is the opening. That there's an unusual phrase that's being used here for his passing. And things that are unusual give us room to make a drush.
What's the actual, what is Vayechi actually mean? Is it read it?
Well, it means this, because it's not really used in any other contexts. It means definitely something to do with passing.
What's the root?
Exactly what you have here, the Gimel Vav Ayin. It's not used a lot. There's only about a dozen or two usages in the entire Tanakh. And this is the only one that's connected to a patriarch. And many of the other ones are used more poetically, and so rather than narratively. So it's unusual, to say the least. Now, does it mean passing away? Almost certainly, it means passing away in some way. But it's unusual enough that Rabbi Yochanan feels that there's a little bit of a chink in the verse that can be used to make this claim, supported as it will be on the back page. Okay? But there's more to support this sort of idea. Does everybody in the Bible die?
Eventually, Elijah.
All right, Elijah. Right? We all celebrate Pesach here, right? And hopefully we also all celebrate Havdalah. And who do we invite to our Seder, and who do we invite in every Havdalah? Elijah. Why are we inviting Elijah?
Because he's flying around.
For those of you who are at home, with the flying around the world, make sure that we all get the hand gestures. He's flying around. So is Elijah like some Passover Santa Claus? Right, in a fiery chariot rather than a reindeer sled? Why do we believe that Elijah might still be around?
Because he was taken in a chariot up to heaven, and everybody, you could see him go, but he didn't actually die. He just,
How do you know he didn't actually die?
well, because you could see.
Because you didn't see, and it doesn't say,
Yeah.
and he died.
Right.
Okay, the words weren't there, and he died. So it seems that perhaps he didn't die. Maybe? All right, well, there's another character that also, according to Midrash, didn't die. Ready?
Where am I? Oh, I'm reading this.
Yep.
Pinchas still exists.
All right, Pinchas, or Phineas if you're doing the English. Who's Pinchas?
He punished
Oh.
Okay, so go all the way back to the Exodus, right? And Aaron has a son, Eliezer. Eliezer has a son named Pinchas. Pinchas was not appointed to be one of the Kohanim because he had already been born before the Kohanic status had been granted, but he was still a grandson of Aaron, still had stature, still a member of the Levite tribe. And when Zimri, who was from the tribe of Shimon, was, shall we say, indulging rather flagrantly with an idolatrous woman, Pinchas famously grabbed a spear and shunk, drove it through both of them into the ground. He was zealous to stamp out this immorality. We remembering some of the story, or does it sound completely new? If you haven't heard the story before, that means you don't come to shul during summer. Because it's one of our Bamidbar portions that happens usually in the middle of summer, and so oftentimes it doesn't get heard by those who take summer off from shul. So make sure you come this coming summer, and then you'll hear the story in its entirety, or you can flip to Parashat Pinchas and the parasha right before to get more of the full story. So there is a teaching in the Midrash that Pinchas still exists. That Pinchas didn't die either. How do we justify that?
And Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, "Shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease?" And the Lord said, "Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands."
All right, so in the book of Judges, there is a horrific case where the other tribes of Israel are battling against the tribe of Benjamin. It's one of the explanations for why the tribe of Benjamin was so small, because of this horrible war. And when they were debating whether or not they should go attack again, they consulted the Kohen, and guess who the Kohen is? Pinchas. Now, this is in the period of the Judges. Do the chronology, right? We have Moses first. When Moses passes away, who takes over?
Joshua.
Joshua. When Joshua passes away, who takes over? Well, we're just going to do it like this because it's a group that happens sequentially, not consecutively. The Judges, the Shoftim. And this is at the end, although there's an argument about where it comes in the full chronology, that chapter 20 is right near the end of the book of Judges. So if Moses was way back here, and then you go through the life of Joshua, and then you go through at least some of the judges, and Pinchas is still around, that's a really long life. We see that? And even if he was already born before the Exodus began, so that's at least 40 years, and then, a good another 40 years, and then maybe another 40 years. He's at least, maybe, if we're going to stretch it, he might be able to get by and say he's 120, but chances are at this point he would be older than that. That's already within the Tanakh, giving us a clue that there's something special about this guy Pinchas. How are we doing? We're getting a little disconcerted about the undead? Right, this is the zombie Jew. All right, keep going.
Joshua wrote the book that is called by his name. But is it not written, and Joshua, son of Nun, servant of the Lord, died? Phineas finished it.
All right, so after all, Joshua, according to at least some traditions, wrote the end of the book that Moses wrote, meaning the last paragraph of the Torah, which talks about Moses dying. Well, then that means that Pinchas, if he were still alive, he would have written the end of the book of Joshua. Because after all, Joshua couldn't write, and then the Joshua died. You need someone else to write those lines. And so it must have been Pinchas, says the Talmud. How are we doing? Still uncomfortable about this notion of someone not dying?
Yeah, well, did they do the same thing we do, which is name our people after deceased relatives, so this may be a different Pinchas?
You don't actually get a long pedigree for that custom in the Tanakh itself. There are some names that are recycled, but within the Tanakh itself, you don't get a chain of people being named over and over again for family names.
That's true, there isn't another Abraham.
You don't get a lot of Moseses, you don't get a lot of Jacobs and Josephs and such, so there are occasional names that do get more than one person, but by and large, most people have unique names. And certainly there does not seem to be a tendency for naming for people within your family. And, the book of Judges is quite explicit, that it's Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. That's a pretty distinctive pedigree of pointing to a precise person, and one that should be dead. Now, none of you seemed upset when we talked about Elijah still being alive. Why are you looking at me so funny when we're talking about Pinchas still being alive?
Because we grew up with Elijah being alive as children.
We accepted it as children, so as adults, we didn't question it. And our credulity is big enough for one never-dying person. But for two never-dying people? And three never-dying people, if we're going to throw Jacob on top of it? I mean, come on, don't people die? Right? We might be able to stretch our imagination to allow one person to not be dead. But you're pushing it, Rabbi, if you're going to try and convince me that these other guys aren't dead too. Well, let's go ahead and see how that happens. Keep going.
Great is the peace which was awarded Pinchas, for the world can exist only through peace, and the entire Torah is peace, said Rabbi Shimon ben Halafka. There is no vessel containing blessing other than peace.
So he gets this Brit Shalom, Pinchas, as a reward from God, this reward of peace, this covenant of peace, as his reward for having done the spear killing thing. And this notion is that is the ultimate reward, is to have this peace, this ultimate reward to be blessed through peace. And what could be more perfect than not dying? Right? Wouldn't that be the ultimate statement of God's blessing and support? Wow, you guys really aren't buying this, are you? Really a lot of skeptical expressions. I'm going to turn the camera around and pan across the room.
Does God approve of any particular person taking it upon himself to carry out his wishes?
I mean, are we really a big fan? Not just the people carrying out God's wishes, which of course God does approve of that. He wants us to celebrate Shabbat. He wants us to keep kosher. He wants us to be honest in our business and to do what God wishes in all those ways. But does God really want us to go around sticking spears in people?
Well, that's my question. Is that something that's kosher?
Is it kosher? Well, you definitely couldn't have it for lunch. But is that something that is approved of?
Right.
Well, God does say explicitly in the Torah that Pinchas gets blessed with this brit of shalom, this covenant of peace. And I think that could be seen as being approval. The question is whether or not that is blanket approval for what he did, or whether it was limited approval for what he did at that moment.
If that was the case in those times,
Mhm.
why would it not be the case in these times?
That's a very good question. And indeed, if you read the next line,
He who sees Phineas in a dream, or he who sees Pinchas
Yeah.
in a dream, will find that a miracle is done for him.
according to the Talmud, seeing this guy in a dream is even a beneficial omen. That if you have a dream about Pinchas, that means something good is going to happen, that there will be a blessing. So it definitely seems like there is some positive adulation for this sort of person. But that's not the whole story. Okay? Yes.
Pinchas is Elijah.
All right. Did that help everyone?
Not much.
Well, you all said you were fine with Elijah not dying.
That's right.
So I thought if I pointed out that according to the tradition, Pinchas and Elijah are the same person, that would make you much happier.
Can I go back?
Good.
Brit Shalom.
Yeah.
Brit Shalom is a covenant of peace, or a peace bond,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. Maybe what this means is that God said, don't do that anymore.
A covenant of peace may not be.
You should be a peaceful man and not sticking spears through people.
Right. A covenant of peace may not just be putting a plaque on the wall that says you have earned God's covenant of peace, but a covenant of peace may be a set of handcuffs that says you will be peaceful from now on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your service, but we're taking your gun.
I don't want you to do that anymore.
Right. I appreciate the sentiment. It may have been necessary at the moment, but I don't want this to become a precedent.
Yeah.
So you will be shackled to peace from now on.
Which addresses
Sally's?
Sally's question.
Yes. But definitely it does not come across, as we're going to see, as being a unmitigated blessing, as an unmitigated approbation. Certainly the sages in the Torah understand what it means to act zealously in defense of God, in defense of Torah, in defense of our people. But they also are very, very careful to make sure that does not become each individual's prerogative, especially to do so in lethal capacity. It's one thing to be zealous, to run out and to help others, to give tzedakah, to be scrupulous beyond doubt in your business and other ways. But when it comes to picking up a spear, the zeal does need to be directed, or else you end up with a lot of people on the end of spears. And that is certainly something the Torah did not want. So the equation of Pinchas to Elijah is not necessarily an unadulterated benefit as well. That is to say, Elijah, as much as we hope for his coming as a herald of the Mashiach, is not necessarily a figure who also escapes criticism, as we'll see.
Said Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Pinchas is Eliyahu, Elijah. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, you brought peace between Israel and myself in this world, so in the future you will bring peace between myself and my sons, as it is written, behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the arrival of the day of the Lord, and he shall reconcile parents with children.
All right, so why would Elijah and Pinchas connected? Well, according to Reish Lakish, because they both have to do the same job. Pinchas did the job of reconciling God to Israel, and so in the future he will have a chance of reconciling Israel to itself and to God again. And that will be the coming of the Mashiach. So he's already good at that. So of course it's the same person. And since we said he didn't die, and we know the other guy who didn't die in the Tanakh, famously, not Jacob for a moment, was also Elijah, why not just make them both the same person? Right? Then we only have one person who's not dying.
So what you're saying is when Pinchas drives a sword through those two people. What he's showing God is we're not going to be idolaters. We will be
Correct.
doing what you want. Because otherwise God might have been angry at everybody for allowing this guy to
Not
do
might have been, God was angry, and God was already engaged in a plague to wipe out the people.
Right.
And by Pinchas stopping the idolatry and immorality, he stopped God's anger and rescued the people. He didn't rescue the guy who was dead, but he rescued all the rest of us. So by acting zealously at that one moment, he was able to forestall disaster. Now, Elijah, if you remember from your Haftarot and from your study of the Book of Kings, also broke the rules and acted zealously on behalf of God. Do you remember the showdown on the Carmel Heights? If you've ever been near Haifa up in Israel, you could go down to the heights, and it's the same piece of dirt that Elijah stood on, where he had a showdown with the northern kingdom and the priests of Baal, the other pagan god that had come in. You probably all have at least heard the name Jezebel, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so she was the one who imported this foreign paganism, and the people lapped it up, and so he had this ultimate sacrifice showdown, where each one of them did an altar, and the only rule was, you're not allowed to light it, your God has to light it. And so all the priests of Baal jumped up and down and cut themselves and wailed and gnashed and all of that, and of course nothing happened. And then Elijah soaked his altar in water, and he said, God, I need your help to bring the people back to you. And boom! Fire from heaven, altar goes up, everybody goes, woo! Kills the priests, and a day and a half later Elijah's running for his life. Because miracles don't last very long. And people's faith based upon fire from heaven doesn't last as long as you might think. And Elijah ends up in a cave down in Sinai, and God asks him, why are you here? This is not your normal address. And he says, because I have acted zealously for you and for you, but I alone am all that is left in Israel. And God tries to teach him some understanding, that God's not in the fire, God's not in the wind, God's not in the noise, the sound, the earthquake. And Elijah repeats, I'm the only one left, I've been acting zealously. And that's when God replaces him. And God chooses Elisha to be the new head prophet. And Elisha escorts Elijah, and Elijah takes the chariot up.
Was God angry with him for answering that one?
I'm not sure whether the word would be angry or disappointed. But there is a teaching that God invites Elijah, as we participate, to every single Brit Milah. If you've been to a circumcision, you'll see that there is a chair that's called the chair of Elijah. Mm-hmm. Well, why would we have a chair of Elijah? We think we're giving birth to the Mashiach? Is this...
To some parents, the child.
To some parents, the child is, indeed. But one of the teachings with regards to it is that because Elijah doubted the Jewish people, because he said, I alone am left, which is essentially insulting all the rest of us, God said, because you said that, you will have to attend every single Brit Milah for the rest of eternity to see that they have not abandoned me, that they are still part of my Brit, that they are still part of my covenant. And you will be a guest there, and you will understand that the people of Israel have not given up on me and not given up on my covenant, not given up on my Brit. Questions, comments, reflections? Everybody's thinking back to all the circumcisions they've been to? Okay. And let's give one more side to Pinchas / Elijah.
One man there was living at the time who, if he had been questioned about the case, would have been able to give a decision.
All right, so what case are we talking about? We're talking about the case of Yiftach, also from the book of Judges. Yiftach was the chieftain for a while, and he made a very, very stupid and famous promise. He said, God, if you let me win in battle, I will sacrifice to you whatever comes out of my house upon my return. Right? We all can see exactly where this vow is going to go, even if you haven't read the story. So man comes home from battle, guess what comes running out of his house to meet him?
Not his daughter.
Not his dog, but his daughter. His daughter comes running out to greet him. She says, "Woo, you won!" And he goes, "Ah, and now I've lost, because now I'm supposed to sacrifice you." Well, Judaism knows that you don't have to do that. That if you've made a stupid vow, that there are ways to annul the vow based upon its stupidity. But you have to go to someone to do that. You just don't rip up your vow yourself. You do have a process for doing this. And what Yiftach should have done is gone to the person who could have helped him annul it. And guess who that was?
One man was living at the time there. This was the high priest Pinchas. But he said proudly, "What? I, a high priest, the son of a high priest, should humiliate myself and go to an ignoramus?" Yiftach, on the other hand, said, "What? I, the chief of the tribes of Israel, the first prince of the land, should humiliate myself and go to one of the rank and file?" So only the rivalry between Yiftach and Pinchas caused the loss of a young life. Their punishment did not miss them. Yiftach dies a horrible death. Limb by limb, his body was dismembered. As for the high priest, the Holy Spirit departed from him, and he had to give up his priestly dignity.
All right, so in case you wonder why Yiftach does not continue, why Pinchas does not continue to be the Kohen, despite having been mentioned in the book of Judges back on the first page, it's because he got it wrong. Because he refused to go to Yiftach because he thought he was better than him, and Yiftach refused to come to him because he thought he was better than him, and in the process, the girl dies. You know, two stubborn guys, and what happens? Someone else gets hurt. And that's not the way a Kohen Gadol is supposed to behave. It's not the way a Prince of Israel is supposed to behave either. Make sense? All right, just one little digression just so we understand why we talk about the limbs falling off.
Yiftach lost his life to a terrible disease where limbs started falling off one by one, and it says he was buried in the cities, plural, of Gilead, and Pinchas lost his ability to receive the Ruach HaKodesh.
Okay, so because it says he was buried in the cities of Gilead, how do you bury someone in more than one place? You bury their bits. Right? And since we would never, God forbid, dismember a body after it had died, it must have meant that different parts were falling off in different places and they were buried wherever they fell. Not very nice. Yeah. Okay. So, Jacob. Jacob isn't dead. How do we come back? We've got this notion here that we've got this guy, Elijah Pinchas, who is both zealous for God but also maybe a little too zealous, who is someone who defends Torah and has been there for our people and tried to rally the troops, and if we're calling Elijah and Pinchas the same person, has both stabbed the one guy and stood on the Carmel Heights and called down fire from God, and yet also seems to be considered to be rather arrogant and rather self-absorbed, and also seems to be someone who God is trying to teach that the people of Israel are more and better than he seems to think they are. He only sees them as sinners that need to be staked, and God does not seem to be happy with that assessment of the rest of his children. How does this all fall back into the story of Jacob, and why in the world Rabbi Yochanan would have made that statement? Final paragraph.
So, to continue from the first paragraph where it said, Jacob did not die.
And they said, well, wait a minute, what do you mean he didn't die? Did the embalmers, were they doing nothing? Were the eulogizers doing nothing? What about the grave diggers?
But Rabbi Isaac replied to Reb Nachman, I am expounding a verse of scripture, as it said, no, do not fear Jacob, my servant says, no, do not fear Jacob, my servant, says the Lord, nor be afraid, Israel. For lo, I will save you from afar, and your children from the land of their captivity. The prophet therefore compares him and his descendants. Just as his descendants yet live, so he is yet alive.
All right. So Rhea, you mentioned Israel and Jacob as being synonymous. Well, here, Rav Isaac is taking it as a deliberately non-synonymous, but connected. Now, when most of us read this section from Jeremiah, which is from one of the Haftarot, we're just using the word Jacob and Israel interchangeably, and we're using them as a synonym for the people of Israel. And it's just a poetic description. Very often, the Haftarah will talk about Ephraim. And when it says Ephraim, it doesn't mean Joseph's son. It means the whole northern kingdom of Israel. And when it talks about Judah, it doesn't necessarily mean one of Jacob's actual kids. It means the whole tribe of Judah or the southern kingdom of Judah. They're poetic stand-ins for the whole. It's, what do they call it, synecdoche, when you have in literature, when you have a piece that stands in for the whole. And here, Jacob, Israel, interchangeable, it's just being poetic doublet. No, not the interpretation he's going for here. He's saying, just as Israel is still alive, and they are being promised redemption, that must mean then that Jacob is still alive, and being promised to come back with them. Of what benefit is such a statement? I mean, are we going to be going around the world now looking for Jacob and seeing if we can find him? Is he hiding somewhere, waiting to reveal his identity? What's he trying to teach us by such a statement? If not that, be careful who you bump into, he might be Jacob. Okay, well, let's take it with the other undying person and take it with a little bit of our contemporary discussions. So what was the problem with our undying Pinchas / Elijah? What was his character flaw from our discussion? I mean, the good part is he's zealous, but what's his character flaw? How does he view the rest of the Bnei Yisrael?
In the rest of the tribe.
Discouraged, frustrated, lacked faith in the rest of the children of Israel, right? He sees the rest of the children of Israel as already dead. He sees us as dead because we're not zealous enough. We are not proper. We are not defending God the way he's defending God. He's the only one who's willing to take up the spear. He's the only one who's willing to call down fire from heaven. The rest of us are dead to our Judaism. The rest of us are essentially dead. We just haven't been buried yet. And that was the attitude of Pinchas and Elijah that God found to eventually be intolerable. To eventually say, no, this is a level of arrogance and of self-importance and singular purpose that is being unconstructive. It leads to the death, according to the Midrash, of Yiftach's daughter. It leads to him no longer being fit to be a prophet and having to be replaced by Elisha. And according to the Midrash, it means that Elijah has to make permanent Brit Milah visits to remind himself that that's not the case. And this Midrash is trying to remind ourselves of that as well. That the spirit of Jacob isn't dead, because Israel isn't dead. That the man who went through all that trouble, all the ups and all the downs, remember we were discussing the whole of his life when we began, that his spirit, the good and the bad, is not gone any more than we are gone. And we're not gone because he's not gone. That we are inexorably linked. That when we look at the Torah, when we read the stories of the Avot, of the patriarchs, we shouldn't be thinking that we're just reading about a bunch of dead guys. We're not just reading a novel, God forbid, or even a history book. We are reading about living and breathing spirits that continue to inspire and give meaning to our own existence and how we should be living. And as long as we keep Jacob as a vision alive, then we as Israel will be alive, and we truly have nothing to fear. That we will still be the children of Israel, no matter how bad things look, no matter the ups and no matter the downs. We are still the children of Jacob, and Jacob, our father, is still there with us. Does it mean literally he's not dead? Of course not. Rabbi Yochanan knew that he was dead. The Talmud knew that he was dead as a body. He knew he had been buried. I mean, the eulogizers, the embalming, everything, they knew he was dead. Nobody was trying to make some fanciful zombie claim for the undead Jacob. But what they knew was that the idea of Jacob, that what Jacob represented and what we represent as being the children of Jacob as well as the children of Israel, was an essential element that needs to be seen as being alive and well, because it's too easy to see ourselves as gone. Right? We read the Pew Research results. It's, we're dying, we're losing. Did anyone notice in the Pew Research results that the population of Jews as a total had not gone down? Okay, all of the lamenting, all of the hair pulling, all of the clothes ripping over the tragedy of the Pew Research, and yet there were no fewer Jews than there were the last time they did the survey. And if you look carefully, even for the conservative movement, yes, the number of self-identified conservative Jews had gone down, but the number of conservative Jews still in synagogues had barely diminished over the last 20 years. So yeah, a lot of the people who are unaffiliated, if you ask them, they don't identify as being a conservative Jew. Big surprise. The fact that that number is smaller simply means there are more unaffiliated Jews. It doesn't mean the conservative synagogues themselves are actually not doing well. We're not doing well at bringing them in. That's another issue, yes. But the synagogues themselves are holding steady. And the number of conservative Jews who put their Judaism and Israel and observance and learning high on the list of their life priorities was amazing. 90s, 80s, 70%. We're not doing so bad. We're not dead. All of those grave diggers and embalmers and eulogizers for the conservative movement or for Judaism as a whole have been wasting their time. Because Jacob ain't dead and Israel ain't dead either. And the people who think that it's only with the fire and the zeal, that it's only them that are the remnant, they're wrong too. And they should come and they should see, just like Elijah has to visit all of the Brit Milot. I wish the Pew researchers would come and visit synagogues and see what vibrant and living Judaism is. And I wish the people from both the left and the right and the middle and whoever knows who are talking about other people passing and not being zealous or proper would come and visit and see the life that still exists. Jacob isn't gone, and his children aren't gone, and we will live forever. Don't be afraid. Live. All right, any final comments or points? Okay.